Let's talk about your Sacramento Kings. What do we expect from this team? How does any of it make sense? Well, the answer is it's the Kings. So, Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NBA fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd, and I love making comments in the comments section on websites. Yes, all websites. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So, bangs, comments, double bangs, double comments, thumbs, subscribes. As always, I've got the aim to hit the 100K subscriber mark. I want to get that YouTube play button. I don't know that we'll get there. We probably won't. We're about 15,000 away. Hopefully we get there. So if you haven't subscribed, be a part. Do your part to get to 100K. Let's talk Kings. And I'm recording this on the 9th of August. For me, 8th of August in the States. And at this point, they haven't made a trade for Jonathan Kuminga. At this point, they haven't signed Russell Westbrook. At this point, Vivek Ranadive hasn't done the next stupid thing that he's going to do. But, you know, we've got time. So we're going to talk Kings. So let's talk Kings. So, he's back again to talk about the Sacramento Kings. Matt George is here. I mentioned this at the start of the show, Matt, but we're recording this before many of these rumored moves have occurred, whether it is Jonathan Kuminga or this has sort of died off a little bit. Now I'll ask you about it now. There was talk that Russell Westbrook was coming to Sacramento. I haven't heard anything about that for the last week. What's going on with that?
Yeah, the joke is that Russell Westbrook is sitting in the waiting room or the lobby of the Kings front office just waiting for this Kuminga deal to either happen or not happen. I imagine
he's there with Al Horford and D'Anthony Melton. They're all just sitting around going, can something happen here?
They're all just, we'll be in Northern California maybe. Yeah, like the Kings as of now don't, I think, have the room to just outright bring him in. So I think they would need the Jonathan Kuminga trade to go through, to which they would send out Malik Monk and his money that would then open the door for Russell Westbrook. It's like there's a stack of dominoes for both the Warriors and the Kings that getting this deal done would set off a chain reaction for both of them. But the Kings have put their offer out there, and the Warriors and Kuminga are having a staring contest. So all we're doing here in Sacramento is just waiting for August to move into September and to see if anything happens. But I know there's still significant interest between Russell Westbrook and the Sacramento Kings, but freeing up the ability to actually make that happen, that's where we're at. So who knows if anything actually does happen.
The number one question with that, which we don't have to answer now, is like, why? But the next part is, which takes me into my actual question, is like, we saw this last season. They brought in DeMar DeRozan. We've seen this in other years when the question is, they've got this guy they picked in the top 4 a few years ago. Keegan Murray was really, really strong as a rookie. We thought, okay, he can take it. Maybe he can take a next step. Maybe he can step forward. And I go, no, we're going to keep him squished down. And then we're going to do it again. We're going to squish him down even further. Now it's like, okay, so now we're going to have DeMar DeRozan. We're going to have Zach LaVine. And now we might bring in Jonathan Kuminga to play the same position. And it's all like, why are they they got this young guy who on a team with it is much older than you think, or maybe you know how old they are, but other people don't think that, and then they just continue to go, no, we're not going to actually let you grow in your role. We're not going to see if you can do anything, but we're going to make you do less. We're going to make you get out there and play fewer minutes and have fewer opportunities. Like, why? What's the point of it?
That should just be the title of this podcast, is Sacramento Kings. Why?
Yep, exactly.
There's a whole lot of that happening in Sacramento too. With Keegan Murray specifically, I think it's a mixture of a couple of things. The Kings' timeline has, I suppose, changed a little bit. Initially, it was, okay, the Kings are trying to make the playoffs by any means necessary. Last year, there was, quite frankly, a playoff mandate put upon this organization by ownership, and the train fell off the tracks or was derailed very, very quickly with the Mike Brown firing and De'Aaron Fox is moving on from him. But there was always a question of bringing in DeMar DeRozan. How did that impact Keegan Murray? Would he take shots away from Keegan Murray? And while I understand statistically, like DeRozan coming in, he's going to shoot anywhere around 17 to 20 shots per game, there's less to go around for anybody because there's only one basketball. I think that was used as a bit of a crutch or an excuse for Keegan Murray specifically. Now, Keegan has had an immense workload put upon him on the defensive side of the ball, not just because he's one of the best defenders on a bad defensive team, but because he's one of the few guys that's serviceable that's actually 6'8", 6'9" on this roster. The Kings have zero depth at his position, and they still don't really have any depth at his position. So they put such an emphasis on him on the defensive end that, again, that could drift into excuse territory of like, oh, he's working so hard on defense, he doesn't have the legs on the offensive end. The reality is for Keegan, like, are you going to be a high-level two-way player or are you not? Because you're going to be needed to carry a lot of the load on the defensive end. But offensively, as a two-way player, we still expect you to carry your weight on that side of the ball too. Keegan Murray's three-point percentages have plummeted since that rookie year, and I think they've been using him in less catch-and-shoot scenarios and trying to get him to be more of an overall well-rounded scorer, which is a part of his game that he needs to build up to. But what Keegan needs to develop is a voice. And I've had this conversation with new Sacramento Kings general manager Scott Perry. He said around the same thing. I can tell you, I could count on like two hands the amount of times over Keegan's first 3 seasons that he scored 10 or 12 points in the first quarter and then barely touched the ball for the rest of the game. Now, to some extent, that's on the Kings and coaching staff. Hey, get Keegan the basketball. He's cooking. But Keegan also has to step up and go, get me the ball. Like, I don't care if DeMar DeRozan or Zach LaVine or Domantas Sabonis or Dennis Schroder or whoever is on this team. Get me the basketball. I'm more capable than just being a 12 points per game, stand in the corner, get lost like Harrison Barnes guy. So Keegan needs to take a lot of responsibility, but the Kings have also put him in a position to where he's not going to get the green light to shine. And hey, maybe if things go south by February or March, the Kings would go in a direction of, Keegan, we're going to start to feature you and show us what you got before signing an extension.
And that all leads back to, again, like Jonathan Kuminga and Keegan Murray play like a similar position. So like you're bringing in these sort of guys and you're bringing in potentially Russell Westbrook, all these guys who need the ball in their hands. So like he had a 14.9 usage last season, Keegan Murray. Given what they're trying to do this season, a full season of LaVine and DeRozan and Sabonis and maybe Kuminga and maybe Westbrook, and like how, I don't know how it improves. I don't know how it changes. Like we can talk. This is the same thing with Keegan that happens a lot, but like I'll bring this around now to also talk Keon Ellis, who was great. Like, and they'd put him in the starting lineup, and then Mike Brown would take him out of the rotation, and then he'd come back, and then he'd play 20 minutes, and someone would get hurt, and he'd play 30 minutes, and he'd play great defense, and he'd shoot well. Then he'd come out of the rotation again, and now again, like they bring in Dennis Schroder, and now they're going to bring in Russell Westbrook, and there is Zach LaVine. So like. And we know the situation. Well, maybe people don't, but they had the opportunity to decline his team option, to make him a restricted free agent and keep control of him and sign him. They said, nah, let's just make him unrestricted so he can go wherever he wants after getting mistreated this season. Why are these the two young guys on this team who they're an old team? They've got these 2 young players who people like and want around the league and fans like him. Why are they making moves to suppress what they do?
Yeah, if there's anything that's been majority negatively received from what Scott Perry has done in his short tenure as the Kings GM, it's the decision to make Keegan Murray, or to pick up his option and make Keon Ellis, a unrestricted free agent next year. I know for a fact that Keon and his camp aren't happy about it, because why the heck would he? He's going to make less money than Devin Carter, for God's sakes, and he's someone who's going to be borderline a starter for this team, although probably not because of the logjam at the guard position, but he's going to be a featured important part of the rotation, right? He is coming off of a season where not only did he continue to do what he does on the defensive end, but he shot over 40% from 3-point range. I mean, it's those guys 43%. I mean, these guys are guys that every team in the league covets. Now, if Keon Ellis were 6'6" or taller, he'd be like, someone would be throwing max money at him at some point. But because he's an undersized guard, he makes up for that kind of in his scrappiness and his grittiness and playing the passing lanes and getting steals, and he shot really, really well. I think the Kings are playing the long game with Keon with the expectation that they will be able to work something out when he becomes extension eligible towards the end of this season. But you're playing with fire a little bit, because did you piss off Keon enough that he is not going to play ball? There's no indication that that's the case, but I have to imagine that he and his camp are going to keep this in the back of their mind. It's like, okay, even if you chose financial flexibility to go out and make more moves this summer instead of extending us, that means I'm not a priority to you. Other things were. I understand though, like I don't equate the Keon Ellis, Dennis Schroder signing in any sort of way, because the Kings are desperate for a point guard. Like, we're completely desperate. Keon Ellis, as he might be the size of a point guard, but I don't think they feel any sort of confidence in him being the point guard. Same thing with Devin Carter, same thing with Malik Monk. So they needed to go out and get a point guard. I don't know if they needed to give Dennis Schroder the amount of money that they gave him. They gave him the 3 years instead of 2 so that they could work out the sign and trade with the Detroit Pistons. It had to be a 3-year deal in order to execute a sign and trade. But overall, I think the Sacramento Kings were desperate for a point guard. They thought Dennis Schroder was the best, most realistic option, and they probably told Keon when they picked up his option, hey, we need to do this to keep the flexibility to make the moves we need to make this summer. But hey, in February, we got you. We want you around. We're going to extend you. We'll see how much changes between now and then, and how willing Keon is to sign the dotted line, and what kind of money they're going to throw at him, because they still got to pay Keegan Murray too.
It's a risky game because, you could say that, and I agree. Keon is not a starting point guard. I think Malik Monk has an opportunity. I thought he was pretty solid when he was put into that role last season, but also that's a problem of their own making. Like, you need a point guard. Yeah, you had them and you moved on from them, and you got rid of them, and then you bring in other guys to block other positions. So, like, it's not like Keon Ellis, I would imagine him and his representation aren't sitting there and go, yeah, you're right, what can you do? I guess it's just one of those things that happens. Like, no, they created that situation. They're also going to create the situation by bringing in Schroder, and they might create the situation by bringing in Kuminga, who needs his 24 usage, and bring in Westbrook, who's going to have the ball in his hands, and Keon's going to be like, oh, you value me so much, and now I do less, and I don't play, and I don't start, and my minutes go down and my touches go down, and like, how would that, like, it's just a very risky sort of scenario they are playing, when they could have just locked it in and not created the scenario which is there. And the thing that's interesting to me is, and I don't want to go on about this too long, I think we'll stop on this point now, is that if Vivek Ranadive is so obsessed with what the Golden State Warriors do, like, he just could have looked at Dennis Schroder playing for them last season and said, yeah, maybe this isn't the guy that we go in on at this level to piss off some of our other players who maybe can provide a sustained level of production. We'll find out. We're going to come back and talk about, though, the coaching situation, the front office situation, and what changes that might bring for this upcoming season. We'll do that in a sec. Today's episode, though, is brought to you by Open Phone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. You might not have your own Jeremy Lamb sitting around to be the shadow GM of your organization, but with Open Phone, you're never going to miss these conversations. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system built to streamline and scale your customer communications, all from an app on your phone or your computer. And Open Phone lets you manage those business calls and texts from a single app. And the shared inbox feature is a game changer. Whatever organization you run, whether it's you're putting your daughter into those positions, her boyfriend, bringing in people who are just yes men, whatever it is, you've got that shared inbox where you can just pass those conversations off, and of course, but you have the final say on all those decisions. Open Phone is offering my listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnNBA. That is OPENPHONE.com/LockedOnNBA. And if you have existing numbers with another service, Open Phone will port them over at no extra charge. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Okay, Matt George is here with me talking about the Sacramento Kings. Last season, they fired Mike Brown. In season, there was talk about concerns or rifts with De'Aaron Fox and the weirdness of no press conference announcements. And there was it was the Kings. Like, there's just this stuff that just happens, and I know that you get frustrated at this because you sit there and go, why are you doing this? Why are you take one step forward and then you take 3 steps backwards. Mike Brown is gone. That's a fact. Doug Christie, again, as far as I know, no real extensive search to replace him. He just took over last season, and it is hard as an assistant in the middle of a season to come in and do sweeping changes. He ran very much similar things to Mike Brown did. The rotations were similar. He led heavily on the minutes of the starters, which, honestly, when your backup forwards are 40-year-old Jay Crowder and 40-year-old Doug McDermott, I sort of understand it. Like, that's another part of Monty McNair being gone. But now Doug Christie's there. He's the full-time coach. What could we see that is different? Is there any indication, like, again, on a more granular level, you're watching every single minute of this team all season, and while from the outside of my perspective, there were not many changes, but you might have seen things leaning a certain way. Now that Christie's in charge, what do we expect to be different on this team versus how Mike Brown ran it?
Well, let's start with me personally. I hope that I'm not screaming at the camera after every single game like I was at a point last season to where, Josh, you remember this. You remember I used to come on Locked On Fantasy Basketball for these previews, and I would try and sell you on why the Kings would be better than you thought, and bring the optimistic side. Last season changed me from blind optimist Matt George to eternal Kings pessimist Matt George because of what the Kings once again did to themselves. I mean, they can't blame anybody but themselves for the fiasco that was last season. We're very intrigued to see what true head coach Doug Christie, not interim head coach Doug Christie, looks like. And Doug dealt with chaos as anybody did. One of Doug's lead assistants is essentially defensive coordinator in Luke Laux, left in the middle of the season to become the head coach of the University of or the Florida State Seminoles. And then the general manager or the assistant general manager of the Sacramento Kings left mid-season to take a job in Utah or something. It was just a complete the Titanic is sinking and all the rich people are jumping off on their little boats. That's what last season felt like, and Doug was sitting there going, well, the analogy he used is, I'm trying to fix a plane while it's in the air. Yeah. That was his analogy. What Doug did really, really well is he managed to rally the troops in a time where the season was in a complete tailspin, a free fall. He got the team to play better at home. He got that team to have at least a more around a slightly above 500 record to get that team back around the 500 mark, because they were pretty decently under 500 when Mike Brown was fired. But how did that season end? They got wiped on their home floor on national television against a Dallas Mavericks team who was the laughingstock of the league because they traded Luka Doncic and Cooper Flagg wasn't promised to them yet. So the season ended in horrific fashion. Now, Doug last season was kind of all about the loving on the guys and bringing everybody together. And that was, I think, necessary for the chaos of the organization. DeMar DeRozan said after the season was over, he never experienced anything like it. I'm like, hey, DeMar, welcome to Sacramento. Glad you're here.
And he came from Chicago as well. So
right. But I think now we're going to maybe see a little bit more of kind of the tough side of Doug, the gritty side of Doug. Doug very much has that attitude of uppercutting Rick Fox. I will fight anybody on the other team. That's just who he is. It's not Ime Udoka adjacent or the same thing as Ime Udoka, but Doug's own spin on it, right? He was ready to fight Steve Kerr at one point last year because Steve was complaining so much in the game. So Doug has that attitude, and I think is going to bring that toughness. And he is backed now by Scott Perry, who also kind of has this reputation of being hard and being tough and being old fashioned a little bit. So what does that look like? Is Doug able to get something out of Zach LaVine's, especially DeMar DeRozan, a little bit on the defensive side of the ball? But also he has to look at this roster and be honest with himself and know, okay, this is an offensively gifted roster, or we have to hang our hat on the offensive end. To me, it's an absolute must if the Kings are going to reach the postseason again. They have to be one of the best, if not the best, half-court offensive team in the league. Doug has this very difficult task of putting together a puzzle where the pieces don't match, or he has 2 or 3 different Lego sets in a bucket and he has to build something out of these pieces that are not synergistic. You'll understand this better than anybody as the host of Locked On Fantasy Basketball, Josh. This feels like the Kings are a team that was put together by someone who had no idea what they were doing in their fantasy draft, and maybe they're new and they just picked based off of names or numbers and they have no clue what they're doing. That's what this roster construction is here in Sacramento, and Doug has to be the gorilla glue or the glue stick that sticks everything together in a way that hopefully floats this season. So we'll see how he does it.
On a tangible note on this team is that 2 years ago in the Light the Beam season, and the surprise and the 3 seed and all that sort of stuff, which, there was a level of excitement. It was super awesome across the whole league. Everyone loved that. Yeah, there was a little bit of maybe that the front office / management was smelling their own farts with where that success of that team went, and, it hasn't worked out since then. But what they did, Matt, is they said, all right, we're going balls to the wall. We're playing fast. We're having the best offense that we can possibly have and that the league has seen in a period of time. And then they said, all right, we're not doing that anymore, and we're going to slow things down. And then last season, when Doug Christie went over, it got even slower. The pace dropped significantly. According to my numbers, their pace for the season was about 100. The last 2 months, it was at 97. So they became one of the slowest teams in the NBA. Is that the Doug Christie staple? Is that what we're going to see?
Yeah, well, can I jump in too, just so your audience understands, because I know not everybody's locked into Kings basketball on your audience's side. understand too, what happened in that first season, the Beam Team year, was that Mike Brown had pretty much full autonomy. He came in and he was the guy, and he said how they were going to play. And after the Kings made the playoffs, the Kings started getting more people involved and too many cooks in the kitchen, which has been a consistent problem with this organization since Vivek Ranadive took over. Too many voices to where Mike Brown had a harder time executing what he wanted and getting what he wanted. Now, Mike also made mistakes too of sacrificing too much on the offensive end for his defensive vision with a roster full of offensive guys. But he also had a front office that refused to supply him with any wings that are 6'8", 6'9". And what happened? They lost to the Pelicans with length and athleticism 6 times in the same season. And then last year was last year. So that's just the context of that. It's hard not to slow the ball down when you've got DeMar DeRozan as the feature of your offense, right? Which is why I think it only makes sense that Doug Christie try and just maximize the roster that he has. I think Mike Brown, a mistake that Mike made, is he tried to fit his roster more into his vision. I think what Doug has to do, at least in the short term, is he wants to establish a culture. He wants to establish an identity. In fact, I think that's what this season is about more than wins and losses for the Kings. It's about establishing a culture and identity for this organization. And we'll find out who fits and who doesn't. And to me, I imagine that Zach LaVine doesn't really fit. I imagine that Malik Monk doesn't really fit. But I think what Doug needs to do is recognize the construction of this roster and emphasize those strengths better than Mike Brown did, which is why I think slowing down the pace and making this team one of the best half-court offenses in the league is a must. The fact that, like, Josh, explain this to me. When DeMar DeRozan is signed last summer, there's a video of Doug Christie, DeMar DeRozan, and Domantas Sabonis going down to USC and working out together on their two-man game for like a week. I can't tell you any time we saw that two-man game in action with the Kings last season. They just didn't do it. There was no two-man game between your center who loves DHO and loves to create and DeMar DeRozan, who ended up being kind of your go-to scorer after De'Aaron Fox left. Zach LaVine hopefully can develop a two-man game with Domantas Sabonis. Like, to me, next season is just about Doug Christie emphasizing the strengths of his roster, and if DeMar is still going to be a feature, it's going to be slow and it's going to be half-court oriented.
We talked last offseason about the importance of the biggest name free agent in DeMar DeRozan choosing to sign with the Kings, even though there were iffiness about the fit, and who knows what happens with that pick that they gave up to get him in, and then it's just sort of all snowballed from there. And I think part of the thing is, and this happens when you're in a situation like Sacramento that was starved for success, is you see these little things, not you, but like the organization, and they see, well, look at with the 3 set, look at that, we got DeMar DeRozan. They go, that's it, that's what's important, not whether it makes sense, not whether it makes them better, not whether we can maximize how the team looks. It's just more like, well, we did that was good. Like, DeRozan chose to come here, but like nothing else now makes sense, and that's leads to these problems that compound themselves, and that's going to bring us into our next part, which we'll get to in a sec. But first of all, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. With summer sports in full swing, it might be baseball under the lights at Old Sutter Health Park, it might be golf on the green, it might be high stakes soccer action. FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. So you're following along with that action, you already know what you're doing on there. And with FanDuel, you can make that knowledge into a little bit of money, perhaps. With FanDuel, they've got the new daily promotions. They're fun ways to bet. You can track your favorite matchups. You can get in and check out all of those sports. Futures for the NBA win totals are all out as well. It's fast to pay out. It is easy to use. And it is just a great experience, whether your mates are a part of that or they're off just doing something dumb like, going down to the beach and getting sunburned. New to FanDuel? Well, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started, and don't forget to gamble responsibly. All right, so this last little part I want to talk about, Matt. Now, I framed it this way. It's probably not 100% fair to frame it this way, but I just wanted something to sort of kick off a discussion. I said, could we see this team doing a full rebuild? And I'll explain what I mean by that, because again, when we've had discussions in the past, I was critical of the Kings, of trading, like when they gave away the pick that became Olivier Maxence Prosper in dumping Rashawn Holmes. You gave that away for nothing when you were trying to build for the future. And so Prosper's turned into nothing, but whatever. That was an asset. And part of the rationale was they did it just so they could have enough space to re-sign Sabonis and to re-sign Malik Monk. Malik Monk ended up taking a discount on this for this team. He could have probably got more elsewhere. The contract wasn't a huge deal. He was considered a great part of this turnaround. And now it just feels like they're like, no, we're done with you, mate. Like, he's like on the outs. They have no interest in him whatsoever. So when I talk full rebuild, it's like they built this culture around Fox and Sabonis and Monk. And last season, De'Aaron Fox was gone. Malik Monk said, cool, I'll step up. I'll be the point guard. And again, I thought he played really well in that role. I thought that his dynamism in shooting and driving and scoring and his passing improved. It was all really good. And then again, they just pushed him back to the bench. And now it's like, no, we're going to bring in my opinion, inferior players in guys like Westbrook and Schroder to play that role. So why are they like, what's the souring in this relationship after, a few years ago, they were saying, we've got to prioritize bringing this guy back. Like, what happened?
Yeah, I think we're learning that there have been some misconceptions with Malik Monk's value around the league. We thought that, oh man, the Kings got him on a steal and that he took less money to come back to Sacramento. But we have a pretty good indication that wasn't necessarily the case. Now, I think he did have a little bit of money, maybe more available to him in Detroit, which he chose the Sacramento Kings over. But Malik Monk's market never was what we thought it was, whether it's because of, I think it's a combination of concerns about how good Monk actually is and the apron system that has led everybody to just be scared money over, especially this offseason. This has been one of the weirdest off seasons and free agency periods ever because of, I think, the apron system and all the scared money. But I think Malik Monk has kind of been a result of that. The Sacramento Kings aren't trying to dump Malik Monk necessarily, but I think it's pretty clear that in Scott Perry's vision, Malik doesn't fit that. And I think Scott also knows that he's got definitely two, borderline three with DeMar DeRozan untradeable contracts. Zach LaVine and Domantas Sabonis' money is not going anywhere. So the $18 million that Malik is making this season, or 18.5, hey, that's something that I could realistically move. But there's just no market for him out there. Teams aren't necessarily interested in him, or they're not interested in that contract that becomes $20 million next year and then a $21.5 million player option in the third year, which Monk would be stupid not to exercise. So I think it's a scared money situation with Malik specifically. I thought Malik did a really, really good job as a starter when he was next to De'Aaron Fox. But as soon as he had to become the primary ball handler, it was pretty clear to me that he just wasn't as comfortable in that role. And I think specifically it had to do with now he's facing the number one point guard of every team on every given night. And defensively, we know that impacted him. And offensively, I think teams were blitzing him a little bit and knowing, okay, this is new to him. Let's try and take him out of it as much as possible. I don't think he was as bad as people make it out to be, but the Kings very clearly at the end of last season did not view him as that starting point guard of the future, and they needed to address that this offseason. So Malik Monk's situation is kind of wishy-washy. The only thing that's clear is that he doesn't seem to be part of the long-term plans in Sacramento.
Yeah, that does seem pretty clear. I talked about this when I was doing the Wolves preview yesterday, and I think there's a little bit of a parallel. Maybe this is just an idea that's sort of germinating in my mind at the moment. It's like there are some teams that there's a I don't even know what the right word is, like a stickiness to past thoughts with plenty of teams. Like, we need a point guard. And like, when you're running as the Wolves, and I talked about Julius Randle and Anthony Edwards, it's like, okay, maybe you don't need like a point guard as much. And when you're the Kings, you just talked about it, like Domantas Sabonis is going to have the ball in his hands a lot. He's going to run all these DHOs. DeMar DeRozan, pretty good passer. He's going to have the ball in his hands a lot. Like, he's going to do that. Zach LaVine has worked as a lead guard and initiator at times. So like, but the idea is like, where Malik Monk is becoming this point guard and we're going to put him in this role. Like, I don't know why they look at that situation and go, well, he could just be out there, score a shooter, but look, he doesn't have to be a point guard, so to speak. He can just be someone who's playing as a point guard because he's the smallest guy out there. But these other guys are handling the ball, and this insistence they had, and that's going to bring me into talking about Dennis Schroder and bringing him in, is they felt that they needed this. They needed this extra point guard in there because, like, I just don't think they were leaning into some of the strengths of these other players. Well, DeMar plays this position, therefore he has to do this. And Sabonis, yeah, we love giving him these assists, but like, we still need a point guard. I think there's a level of like, we need someone. Like, and again, I don't think Dennis Schroeder's that good. Like, he does okay when it's in a really bad team, and the numbers look okay, but they're not really translatable. So what's the... And I don't know, I'm probably just talking out loud. I'm not sure there's a question here. I'll just get to Schroeder about this. Like, do you think that he's guaranteed to be the starter on this team?
Yes, I would say so.
I agree.
And it's important to remember in all these conversations that Scott Perry has inherited an absolute mess. And I think he's trying to do whatever he can to, like, Scott Perry would never have made the De'Aaron Fox for Zach LaVine trade. Like, he never would have done that. And we feel pretty confident here in Sacramento that Monty McNair didn't even want to do that. It was very ownership influenced on what got that trade across the finish line. So to me, two timelines is a term that the Warriors have used, and it's definitely very much a Warriors thing. But I think the Kings are on their own version of two timelines. And what I mean by that is you've got 2 to 3 years of these contracts that you just have to ride out. And the Kings are not interested in fully rebuilding. They're not interested in blowing it up. They continue to raise ticket prices. They've enjoyed the sellouts on a nightly basis since this team became the Beam team, and they have no interest in giving any of that money back or any of that excitement back. So they feel that they have a talented enough roster right now to sell tickets and to be at least intriguing. And I know the curiosity about the Kings around the league is more sarcastic than it is optimistic, but people are curious about what this team could look like. Can they be fun? When Zach LaVine explodes for 20 points in a quarter and just gets hot, how is that fun, right? Domantas Sabonis' DHO game, is that fun? Like, I think Scott Perry, by bringing in Dennis Schroder, is giving the Kings a point guard that in theory can plug and play and help them be what they are, which is just mid, but a play-in team in the Western Conference that maybe can get into the playoffs and potentially win a playoff series on the backs of these veterans that might scrap together 4 wins, while running these contracts out, bringing in young players like Neek Clifford and Maxime Reynaud, and working on extending Keegan Murray so that when these contracts, when DeRozan and LaVine's contracts do run out, now you have your draft picks, now you have your assets to not necessarily start a rebuild, but now you can look more towards the future. So I think Perry's trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He's trying to be as competitive as possible right now without being silly and foolish and trading 3 first-rounders for a dumb all-in move, while establishing a culture and starting to build towards the future to where when the books clear up, now the Kings can really start to make some moves. That's what makes sense to me. I call it Scott Perry's like 2-year or 3-year plan. I don't know if it's going to be that appetizing to watch over the next 2 years, but that's Sacramento Kings basketball.
That's the thing. Like, you got these guys who I guess theoretically, like, LaVine is exciting. He does big dunks, but like putting LaVine and DeRozan and Kuminga and Schroder and Westbrook together, and like Domantas Sabonis is effective. I wouldn't say it's fun. Like, he's effective, but like it's not a fun thing necessarily. So it's just this. And the reason that I went to this rebuild thing is because we saw this team, what they did 2 years ago, and the success, and now like they ship off De'Aaron Fox and they reduce Keegan Murray's role, and they are done with Malik Monk and bring in players, and they're just teams that have different ideas about what makes sense and fitting together. And Sacramento is one of them. Chicago is another one of these teams. Which, am I lumping those together for a reason? Yes, but I just disagree with the way that they try to go about it or how they value these players. I'm always going to be at odds with the decisions they make and how they fit these players together. So when I say rebuild, they're not going to move on from these guys because it's tough to do. But also, I wouldn't have thought they would have traded De'Aaron Fox or just completely dismissed what Malik Monk was doing on this team in his role when the 6 man of the year type seasons. Like, this idea of just constantly like, well, we've moved away from what worked, therefore it's those guys' fault, is a confusing thing that I know has bothered people in Sacramento for a significantly longer time than it's bothered me, Matt, because it's been an ongoing problem. And again, this chapter of even this season is not written yet because there's still other things that are going to go down. And when they do, you're going to have it covered for us over on Locked On Kings. I do really look forward to your Jonathan Kuminga trade reaction show, your mid-December show on why Keegan Murray and Keon Ellis are combining for 30 minutes a game only, and we'll see where all that goes. And then, we've got guys like you mentioned, Clifford and Reynaud, who I think I really loved what they did at the draft, and I hope Reynaud is able to get minutes as a backup center immediately. But where does Clifford fit into all this? I don't know where his minutes go. It's going to be one of those scenarios where I think we're going to be pulling our hair out, and I hope that we're not. But I do worry a little bit about it. Matt, thank you again for coming on and talking about this Kings team, which again, always has a million questions. There's always things to ask and try and figure out. And I appreciate you trying to make the most sense out of it.
All I'm saying is just look at my hairline before I covered the Sacramento Kings and look at my hairline now, and it should tell you everything you need to know about this team.
Well, maybe you can pivot to just full-time covering the Athletics. I'm sure that is going to be a lot easier for you, Matt. Like a lot less stress there.
Locked On needs an alcohol sponsorship for that.
I'm in on that. Matt, thank you again.
Thank you, Josh.
And that is the Sacramento Kings preview. This team, again, when we do the fantasy-specific preview, looking at ADPs and breakouts, it's probably going to be different. It might have Kuminga here. It might have Westbrook here. It may not have Malik Monk. It's all I know is that guys like Keegan, who people are always waiting for a breakout, and Keon Ellis, who puts up these great stats that look great on a 9-cat ranking, which don't reflect his fantasy value in the slightest. The squish for minutes in these positions at the moment is pretty real, and it just feels relatively directionless in terms of what they're doing. I would also expect, like Matt talked about and that I asked him about, that the pace of this team is going to go down, so that's fewer possessions per game. We could be in a situation where there are 5-6 fewer possessions per Kings game than there was 2-3 years ago, so just be aware of that as well. And if you want to be ready for the next show, which I believe we're talking Memphis Grizzlies, you subscribe, you thumb it up, and you leave your comments down below. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.